Danke, dass ihr heute hier auf das Westend-Kanal zuhören. Also es ist eine große Freude, heute hier im Westend Verlag, also zwei große Gäste bei uns zu haben. Also hier haben wir Professor Jeffrey Sachs, der ist der Präsident der UN Sustainable Development Solutions Netzwerk, Mitglied der Päpstlichen Akademie der Sozialwissenschaften, Berater für Antonio Guterres. Und vorher war er Berater für US-Präsidenten, Sowjetunion und Russland in Sachen Wirtschaftsreform. Es ist so, Jeffrey, it is a pleasure to have you here.
It's a great pleasure for me to be here. Thank you.
Und hier haben wir Sevim Dadelen. Sie ist außenpolitische Sprecherin der Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht und seit mehr als 20 Jahren Mitglied der Deutschen Bundestag, wo sie unter anderem in Parlamentärgruppe USA saß. Sitzt?
Saß.
Okay.
Sitze immer noch, aber nicht mehr Vizevorsitzende.
Okay. Gut, dieses Gespräch würden wir auf Englisch führen, aber also diese Vorstellungen fanden wir appropriate auf Deutsch. Cool. Jeff, you know your own background and you've met Sevim.
Absolutely. I'm a huge fan, so I'm really, really excited.
It's an honor for me to have both of you here in this Gespräch. I'm going to start with a simple question that'll lead us into the conversation. About a little more than 15 years ago, I was a researcher in the Balkans, and I was able to see firsthand what NATO, UN, OSCE intervention meant in the Balkans. And I went from a Saxion, patriotic American who believed in our diplomatic structures to a rather critical voice in this space. At the time, I had the opportunity to meet John Bolton, George W. Bush's ambassador to the United Nations, hardline opponent of the idea of an international community and of institutions like the UN. And I got a chance to ask him, as I thought, fellow critic, what could replace these institutions that he wanted to scrap? And his answer was woefully lacking in content. And it was more or less America. America can replace everything. Thus, it was no surprise when he was made Trump's national security advisor. But you both are deeply critical of NATO as it is currently existing. And you're both also much more diplomatic than John Bolton. So I feel like I have an opportunity here to ask you, in a similar vein, a three-part question. The first is, without recommendations, just each of you, what do you find most problematic about NATO? With a follow-up, possibly reform suggestions for how you would hope to see the international community interact with one another to make NATO a viable alliance for peace and security. And the final question on that front would be, if NATO cannot be reformed, what structures and plans could replace it to ensure security in Europe? I think with that, I think we can get the conversation started, and it can grow into whatever conversations we want it to.
Well, let me just say that in my work at the UN, I intersected with John Bolton being ambassador to the UN. He's a most unlikable person. And he would storm the halls of the UN, and I always imagined smoke coming out of his ears because he's a nasty man. And he was the ultimate unilateralist, which is America should make demands. And he fails in everything. All those demands end up failing. He was the one that was going to keep North Korea from developing nuclear weapons. So he broke the diplomacy in the early 2000s, and North Korea ended up with had nuclear weapons and intercontinental ballistic missiles and all the rest. It was a complete failure of Bolton's part. But when it comes to NATO, the problem with NATO is that it became an instrument of U.S. war rather than a defense alliance, which it was, and it should have been wrapped up in 1990 when Gorbachev ended the Warsaw Pact. We should have ended NATO, not as a surrender. It was just peace had arrived. It was supposed to be the end of the Cold War. It was German reunification. We were supposed to be defending against a Soviet invasion. Well, there wasn't going to be a Soviet invasion. And then in December 1991, there wasn't even a Soviet Union. And so the whole idea, what's NATO about? NATO became an instrument of U.S. power projection, and that is what has led us to one disaster after another. The U.S. Decided in December 1991, and by the U.S. I don't mean the American people, they were not any part of this. I mean the elites in the CIA, the Pentagon, the National Security Council, the White House, the Armed Services Committee, what we call the blob in Washington. They decided now we're the sole superpower of the world, and NATO is our kind of expeditionary army. So we'll give NATO assignments. The assignments can be bombing Belgrade, the assignments can be overthrowing Libya, the assignments can be doing whatever complete bungling and mess they did in Afghanistan for 20 years. The assignment can be spreading American power eastward, contrary to the promise that was given by Hans Dietrich Genscher and James Baker in February 1990 that NATO would move not 1 inch eastward. Somehow that got erased and expunged. But the problem with NATO is that it's a U.S. aggressive military force that makes insecurity for everybody. That's the problem. What should be done? We should end NATO. We need collective security. We need different approaches. OSCE, by the way, beautiful ideas. NATO is the opposite of OSCE. OSCE is about collective security. It brings Russia, it brings other former Soviet Union, Eastern European, Central Europe, Western European countries together in a collective security arrangement. But NATO's just the opposite. NATO's the United States trying to run the world.
Thank you. That's an interesting, I'd just like to interject here, the senators that I've worked for who work with the OSCE, I've heard it said inside the U.S. diplomatic, is that OSCE is more or less the diplomatic arm of NATO. So from an American understanding of the people that I had worked with, the OSCE was even seen as just a piece of NATO itself.
Well, I think NATO shouldn't have been around. OSCE should have replaced it.
I think we all are facing now the 75th year of the NATO, and the NATO was built from the beginning, from the first second. It was built as a military pact to fulfill the goal of the Americans for a Pax Americana. In the role model was a treaty between Latin American countries and USA. And then they wanted to have a Pax Americana in the transatlantic region. That means between US and Europe. And the goal was always, and that was the function from the beginning of the NATO, to fulfill the geostrategic and geopolitical hegemony of the United States. That is all about the character of the NATO. And but to fulfill this, to realize all these interests, there are three great myths about the NATO. To have a propaganda instrument to the people, that it is a defensive alliance, that it's an alliance of values, and an alliance of democracies. And we know this is historically a lie. From the beginning, one of the members of the NATO funding members is Portugal, after with the fascist dictator Salazar, who was known for his colonial wars, for his slavery, for his torture. In Africa, you can see these torture centers still in some of the Spanish islands, and that's why I think it was a historical lie to say we are an alliance of democracies, and still we do have countries like Turkey, for example, were very authoritarian, suppressing the opposition, helping jihadist groups by arming them for a regime change in Syria, for example. And then we do have, the hypocrisy regarding the Gaza Strip. The war in the Middle East shows us that it's far beyond being an alliance of values. I mean, what kind of values are these? Killing more than 50,000 people, 70% of them children and women, and it's just possible with the help of the NATO states, especially US and Germany. I mean, they are the biggest arms suppliers to Israel still. And the first one is the defensive alliance, the so-called defensive alliance. I mean, we have seen this with the war against Yugoslavia. It was an illegal attack against international law. The illegal attack in Afghanistan, 20 years of war, 100,000 of killed people, a lot of criminal war crimes which never ever have been countable. You know, no one was countable on this. I mean, Julian Assange, I have worked with him very long time, a good friend. He published so many war crimes by the US military and by NATO in Afghanistan, by US in Iraq, and no one was accountable for all these war crimes till today. But he was in prison, and he was in a high super maximum prison in Belmarsh in London for a long time, was persecuted by the US and was hiding in the Ecuadorian embassy in London because of exposing these war crimes and showing us that wars are not clean, like George W. Bush always said, that they are surgery attacks, you know, not harming civilians. He showed us that wars are always very dirty and full of crimes. So I think it was from the beginning just to make sure the hegemonic approach of the United States, a global approach, for example, now, because it's not about only transatlantic, about the Atlantic coasts. Nowadays, NATO is heading east. They're going into the Pacific region. They want to open an office in Japan, in Tokyo. They are having bilateral treaties with Singapore, with South Korea, with Australia, and some other countries arming Taiwan against China. That means NATO is not only to organize the Pax Americana in the European continent, also now globally. I mean, they are overstretching. And this is my hope, actually, when we discuss what can we do as an alternative. I mean, it seems apparently that the NATO is in the heights of on the highest power level at the moment, but I do believe that they are overstretching themselves in challenging now China in the Pacific region, in arming themselves so much, and that's why they have much more poverty in their own countries. They are facing declines, economic declines in a lot of countries just because of the high armament. For example, in Germany, I mean, we do pay more than 90 billion at the moment, 2% of the GDP for arms, for the army. And then we are, just because United States, they want from us, we are arming, we are the second biggest arms supplier to Ukraine, and second biggest funding money supplier for Ukraine, and facing in our country social cuts because of this high armament. And that's why I do believe that in a the thesis is that they have the global approach, but the antithesis is that they are overstretching themselves and imploding. I mean, they are going to implode, and that's why I do believe that it's not that strong how it looked like. And an alternative, I do not believe that NATO can be reformed. I do not believe this. This is not realistic, because the aim is to realize this hegemonic, or to fulfill this approach by the United States, to do everything for the interests of the United States, the geostrategic and geopolitical, and that's why, and economically, I think in an economic way also, and that's why I do believe we need an alternative, especially in Europe, which is independent from the United States. We need a security order, a new security order in Europe, which is independent from the United States, and is looking for their own sovereignty, to do sovereign foreign and security policies according to the interests of the population of Europe, but not according to the interests of the US administration.
Just to say how ridiculous it is that something called NATO, which is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is now
Pacific,
mucking around in East Asia. Yeah. It just shows the absurdity. But of course, as Sevim is saying, this is a U.S. military alliance, and the U.S. wants to use it in whichever way the U.S. wants to use it. So that's why we have this absolutely ridiculous paradox of North Atlantic in Japan and Southeast Asia. I couldn't agree more. This makes no sense. Europe got itself trapped in this. It's not to Europe's security. And the main point that I would add to that right now is you've got very foolish people, including, unfortunately, the Secretary General of NATO, Mr. Rutte, running around saying we should spend 5% of GDP. Well, come on, I can tell you, diplomacy's a lot cheaper than spending 5% of GDP or going to war. How about just having a little diplomacy and finding a solution rather than some ridiculous, incredibly dangerous rearming of Europe?
I mean, as far as I know, not even the US is spending 5% of the GDP for arms and for the military.
Not even close. Yeah. But there's no reason to, because these are problems that are political problems that need political solutions. Europe's not going to get its security if it's got this unbelievably unrealistic and hostile view of Russia, for example, or now of China at the US behest. Diplomacy would go a very long way to achieving real security.
But the thing is, wasn't it also the new President Trump who was asking for 5% of the GDP? It wasn't only Rutte. I mean, Rutte, as you said, is just the general secretary. He's the secretary of the U.S. because U.S. In just the staff of NATO, the chief of command is an American, always. And he is the one who can say anything and do anything. So he is just the general secretary of the European always.
Yeah, but grown-ups shouldn't say stupid things.
Yeah, I totally agree on this. But the problem is, I think, the problem is that the new president of the United States is asking for 5% GDP. And that's why now the European politicians...
Pardon? He wants to sell armaments.
Yeah,
he's
absolutely.
He's a salesman.
Yeah.
This isn't about security. He wants to sell armaments of Boeing or General Dynamics or Northrop Grumman or Raytheon. Come on, this is a game. Obviously, it's a game.
Yeah, but it apparently it's working because already in the German government, for example. The Greens, Mr. Habeck, he is the candidate for Chancellor of the Green Party, the most belligerent, most warmongers in Germany at the moment, the Green Party. And but also the conservative Friedrich Merz, the candidate, or from the liberals, they are already saying that they are willing to pay 3 or 3.5% of the GDP. That means, at the moment, 90.5 billion we are paying already of the GDP, of 2% of the GDP. And if it comes to 3.5%, like the Greens are now saying and claiming, that means 160 billion per year for armament, for military. And 5% means, like the far-right party in Germany, the Alternative for Germany, it's called, who had Alice Weidel as a candidate. She was very lately in a call with Elon Musk, with American oligarchs now. And she is already saying 5% is okay, even we could spend more than 5%. So 5% means 220 billion euro. This is the half of the national budget. Our national budget is 470. And it's just incredible, but they are so subservient at the moment, trying to get the attention of the President Trump and his green light for their policy, and it's just incredible. So I'm very delighted to hear that it's totally absurd from your point of view.
Trump must be having a good laugh
Yeah.
at how ridiculous this is. By the way, the U.S. and Germany, we had a race. Whose foreign minister could be more of a minister of war? Was it Baerbock or was it Blinken?
They're pretty close, huh?
Yeah, it was amazing because the two most warmongering,
Absolutely.
anti-diplomats you could imagine, anti-diplomats, not a moment of diplomacy, just war.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Jeff, you said earlier that it would be a mistake not to take Trump seriously. When Trump says something, that it makes sense to take it seriously. At the same time, it sounds like this is a negotiation. It sounds like this is a beginning. He says 5% and he's happy when you're raising it to 3.5%. What is a strategy you would recommend to Europeans, given the need to take Trump seriously in what he's saying?
Frankly, if Trump said, if you don't do this, I'm leaving NATO, I'd say, thanks God. Now we can have our own policy.
Well, I don't think that he's going to leave the NATO.
No, I'm saying if Trump said that, okay, fine. Look, Europe does need its own security. Europe should not be subservient to U.S. foreign policy. The war in Ukraine was a U.S. project, which is destroying the German economy. It's destroying the European economy. It's a U.S. project. Anyone here in Germany that supports it is supporting a U.S. project. Anyone that says, oh, it's because Putin wants to invade Europe is either lying or so ignorant that they don't know how to do their job. Because this is a project starting from 1994 to have American power projection eastward, completely contrary to every promise that was given, and surround Russia in the Black Sea region. This is obvious. It's so well documented. It's not even not even a thing. So Europe has paid a big price for this American project. By the way, the Americans they're not good at this. They're bad strategists. They're gamblers, but they're gambling with someone else's lives and they're gambling with someone else's continent. This was a game. It was a game that Zbigniew Brzezinski described in 1997. We'll push eastward, and what can the Russians do? Nothing. They're going to have to acquiesce. You can read the chapter in his book, The Grand Chessboard. He explains everything. It's just all wrong, it turns out. He said, oh, Russia will never align with China. Russia will never align with Iran. Russia will have no choice but to acquiesce to the eastern push of, and he says, of Europe and of NATO. Okay, it's wrong, but that was a game for the Americans. But Europe, it's not a game. This is your home. Already stop this. Understand there's better ways for security than this. And so, to my mind, Trump is, yes, take him seriously. Don't let him take over Europe. Don't let him take over Greenland. Don't let him say whatever he wants because he says it, and then everyone says, oh my God, we better give him this, we better give him that. No, it's nothing like that. It's just that Europe needs to have its own policy. And yes, that would include its defense policy. But I tell you, a little bit of diplomacy and you won't have the need for this kind of militarization, because Russia is reacting to an America that unilaterally pulled out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty, that unilaterally pulled out of the intermediate nuclear force treaty, that broke the agreement on not expanding NATO eastward, that participated in the coup that overthrew a neutralist government in Ukraine in February 2014, that broke the Minsk II agreement, that wouldn't negotiate with Putin. All of this is obvious if someone would just pay attention. But unfortunately, you have, like we have, warmongers that aren't really telling the truth.
Well, I absolutely agree on this. The thing is, well, I do think that we have to take seriously everything Trump is saying. I mean, absolutely. Like he said a few weeks ago that he is planning to annex Greenland, Panama Canal, and Canada. Everyone was laughing and said, oh, that's very absurd. I think it's not that absurd. The Denmark's prime minister now is totally angry about Trump. He had a phone call. He was Trump on the phone and threatened the prime minister of Denmark. So it shows it's a very serious attempt by Trump. And I think the project to build the largest country in the world, it's the largest state then in the world, that's the project. That's actually the extension of Brzezinski's concept of bridgehead of Europe. And I think that's why we have to really take it seriously what he's going to do. And that's why I would like to know, Jeffrey, your evaluation about, your thinking about Trump's promises, Trump's announcements that he's going to stop the war in Ukraine, because, I mean, is there maybe a chance that he is going to do, regarding his threats towards Russia, that Russia has to do what he is dictating? If not, he will go worse economically and regarding the oil prices, and also he will force more sanctions against Russia. That's his threats. And is there, there are seriously beliefs in Germany that he might do a Minsk III just to get a little bit more time to rearm again Ukraine for a confrontation, and that would be logical with his plan now to create world's largest state in the northwest with Canada, Panama Canal, and Greenland. So how do you think, how likely is it that he is going to have a peace with Russia on Ukraine? Also, in having in mind that he's actually trying to challenge China, his main enemy.
Of course, we don't know what is, what's going to happen, and there are a lot of disparate voices in American elite circles in Washington, in the security state, that have their different points of view. So nothing is settled. But if I had to make a guess, I'd guess that the war in Ukraine is going to end in a short period of time. And I think that Trump's basic view, maybe I'll be proved wrong, but I think Trump's basic view is that he doesn't want a war with Russia, and he doesn't want this ongoing war in Ukraine, and he doesn't want to spend more money on it, and he doesn't want to bother with it. So my feeling is that we're at the end of U.S. finances and arming of Ukraine. And these threats are ridiculous, by the way. Russia doesn't sell anything to the U.S. market, so putting tariffs on Russian goods is the most absurd little blah, blah, blah. It means nothing. So he has no threats. And he probably knows that, and there's a lot of posturing and a lot of bullshit in his normal patter. I think basically he wants to end this war because there's no interest in it. And essentially, look, this was a gamble. This was Brzezinski's gamble. Let's push eastward. Russia can't do anything about it. Russia showed it can do something about it. Biden was an incompetent, in my view. His team was utterly incompetent. They thought that we'll push to Ukraine and Russia can't resist, it won't resist. But if it does resist, we take them out of the SWIFT system, we confiscate their money, and then they'll collapse. Okay, this was a completely wrong evaluation. Then they thought, okay, we'll give them attack missiles and we'll give them HIMARS, and then they'll collapse. Or Putin won't be able to mobilize because then there'll be an uprising against him. Look, they were playing poker with no hand, and they're not good at it. I have no respect for the strategic calculations of Antony Blinken or Jake Sullivan. I don't even know whether Biden was of full mind after the beginning of his term, because apparently he really faded mentally pretty early on, and then they tried to hide that for a long time. But my point is, this was a gamble. From an American point of view, why not? Oh, who cares? Spend $150 billion, test some new weapon systems. No Americans dying, or very few. And the senators said, this is best that American money can buy. We're weakening Russia and no Americans dying. So you have to understand, from the American point of view, this was not a big deal. This was a gamble. It went bad. From Russia's point of view, it was existential. They really don't want America on their border. They really don't want Aegis missile systems. They really don't want intermediate range weapon systems of America close to their border. So for Russia, this was a very serious thing. But for America was, I believe, a kind of let's see what happens kind of thing. For Ukraine, it's an unbelievable tragedy. It's a disaster, but the Ukrainians were very naive. And the one that wasn't naive, by the way, was Yanukovych. He said, I got Russia on one side, I got the Americans on the other side, I'll be neutral. Yeah. And America hates neutral. Believe me, that's even worse than being an enemy, being neutral. And so they had to overthrow the guy. So in this sense, I think Trump doesn't really want to continue this failure. Now, the Europeans are running around saying, we'll pick up the war.
And well, it's insane.
First of all,
replace the United States.
Impossible.
It's just, yes,
completely,
I know.
Totally,
yeah.
Logistically, militarily, financially
Absolutely.
Absurd.
Yeah.
Who's the most absurd in the whole world, by the way? Not the Americans. It's the British. The British are so absurd because they had 150 years as world hegemon, and they can't get over it. So Starmer thinks he's Lord Palmerston. He goes over, we give you a 100-year guarantee to the Ukrainians. Worth what? Worth nothing. So there's a lot of BS going on right now. But if you ask me the bottom line of everything, the war is going to end soon, and properly so. And Trump is basically going to say to Putin, okay, no more NATO enlargement. You stop, we stop, and they're going to figure out something.
Yeah.
Considering the perspective that it was all a game, that it was a poker with no hand, all of these things, some people talk about different times during the entire war in the Ukraine when it could have ended, when we could have found diplomacy. One of those points is the March 2022, the negotiations headed, I believe, by Turkey. Was that a serious possibility? Given all of this framework of everything being a game, a strategy, a tendency to build our own power and weaken our enemies, all of that, was this a real moment where we could have had peace, or was this regional power attempting to grow their own power by looking like a peacemaker? What was that moment? And were there other moments that could have been real peace, or were they all sort of these Schaufenster, this
Window dressing.
Window dressing.
I know a lot about that episode and learned a lot about that episode. And at one point, I flew to Ankara to have a very detailed discussion about what was happening. There could have been peace. This was not a game, that was real. What happened was Russia launched its invasion on February 24th. Within days, Zelensky said, okay, we can be neutral. That was the essence of the whole thing. You know, Russia was not even claiming annexation of territory other than Crimea, but not annexation of territory of the Donbass then. All Russia was claiming was the Minsk II agreement, which Germany should have defended but didn't defend. So Zelensky immediately said neutrality. That meant that this was absolutely achievable. Documents were exchanged. I've spoken to very senior diplomats about that. I won't go into exactly all the details, but I've spoken to people who know all about it. And there was very close to an agreement. Then the United States stepped in and said, no neutrality right now. We will give you more arms. You fight on. You can win this thing. That was already in March. The Ukrainians at one moment said to the Turkish mediators, we're not coming back. We're suspending the negotiations. It was just like that. It was one day to the next. And then Boris Johnson came. Boris Johnson is a jerk. And this was obvious then, it's obvious still today, but he amplified this story and told the Ukrainians. And by the way, afterwards he said in his kind of vulgarity that we must win this because Western hegemony is at stake. So he makes no bones about it, that this is about Western hegemony. Well, cripe. This is about Ukrainians losing 1 million people dead and wounded. And it's a tragedy, and it's a complete abuse of Ukraine. The Ukrainians, I find, very naive in this, or, you know, the ones that weren't naive get overthrown or get taken out of power because the United States will have its way. But what gives me the sense that this is going to come to an end is that finally, with a lousy hand, and you're playing a game and the other side isn't playing a game, you fold. And I think that's what's going to happen.
I agree on this. The aim of the Biden administration was to ruin Russia. Our very intelligent Minister of Foreign Affairs, Annalena Baerbock from the Green Party, once said it very openly, publicly, that the goal is to ruin Russia and to weaken Russia. And I think maybe about the role of Boris Johnson, I do believe that Boris Johnson was only the emissary of the Biden administration, because they are not going to do on their own something, you know, without the United States. So that's why I do believe that the war in Ukraine was a personal war of Biden himself as well. So he's personally also responsible for this war, like in the war in the Middle East, in the Gaza Strip. And but about the role of Germany, I just want to add something. Because you said Merkel or the Germans, they should have defended Minsk, the Minsk agreement. Well, if you remember, Merkel, the German chancellor, said publicly, stated later, that the Minsk agreement had served to give Ukraine time to arm itself again. So actually the Germans played a very dubious, very contradictional role here, not a good role, because they betrayed Russians. They betrayed Russia. And François Hollande, the former president of France, he said that's right. That was the aim, to arm Ukraine again, to take some, to win some time, to gain some time, to rearm Ukraine for a conflict, for a confrontation with Russia. And also, if we look back, I mean, the problem started 2008 at the NATO summit in Bucharest, where Germany again played a dubious role, because Merkel on the one hand side with the French president Sarkozy, they stopped the membership action plan of the NATO for Ukraine, like George W. Bush wanted. I mean, he wanted to start the membership action plan for Ukraine and the NATO. They stopped it. But then, on the other hand, they supported the perspective of a NATO membership, and knowing that this is crossing the red line. I mean, that was a red line for Russia, and also the German role at the Maidan coup d'état in 2014. I mean, the Germans, they didn't care that there are fascists there as actors in this coup d'état, and they really so the Maidan was actually was driven by the German policy as well. Our now president Frank-Walter Steinmeier, the German president, was 2014 when the Maidan was there. He was in Kiev supporting the coup against Yanukovych. Although they had an agreement with Yanukovych,
Exactly.
I mean,
That he
to
would stay in
keep in
power.
the constitution, to respect the constitution. That's why I do believe that the Germans, they take a lot of responsibility for this ongoing war in Ukraine as well, and for all the deaths of the people in Ukraine. And the other thing is, it's fortunate to hear that you do think that Donald Trump is going to end the war in Ukraine, because I think Germany and Europe are the biggest loser of this war. I mean, absolutely, the economy is in a decline in Germany. We have a stagnation in the third year now. We have a lot of closing of many factories. We have a deindustrialization. So it's not just the military aspect, it's the economic aspect as well. So we have a social war, we call it, against the population just because of this war. And but my fear is we are afraid that even if Trump is going to end the war, that the Europeans, especially the Germans, because we are the biggest still, the biggest player in Europe and the biggest economy still. So we are paying 20%, 25% of the European budget is paid by the Germans. So we have a bilateral money funding Ukraine and the one through the European Union. And we are afraid that we are going to pay the bill. Again, the bill of a US-American proxy war on the European continent, after paying the bill regarding the refugees who came from Syria. The refugees came from Afghanistan after 20 years of war of US in Afghanistan. From Yugoslavia, we paid the bill. The refugees came here. And,
these were all American wars of choice.
Yes, and we are paying already the bill for more than 1 million refugees from the war in Ukraine, and we are going to pay more. And that's why I do think it shows again how important it is to be independent from the US.
We've just hit our time. I know you have a flight
And the
to catch.
Vasilij especially, and the Vasilij.
I want both of you to have a last comment. I just know we've just hit our time and I don't want you to miss your flight.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just to say, if I'm right and it turns out properly that the U.S. has said enough, my God, I hope Europe understands enough. Stop this. And I hope that Europe could rediscover diplomacy. That means going to Moscow or inviting President Putin here to discuss, not going to Kyiv all the time. Kyiv, Kyiv, Kyiv. Yes, we support you forever, but actually talking to the Russians, because the truth is there needs to be peace on this continent. The economic relations of Germany and Russia were mutually beneficial for Europe and for Russia.
Yeah.
These are complementary economies, I can tell you as an economist. They fit together. The U.S. blew up the pipeline, okay? You have an economy that can't function because it was built on a complementary relationship. It should be rebuilt. This absolutely is possible. And let's just hope that somebody figures this out this time, because this has been very costly, absolutely tragic, completely unnecessary, and we have arrived at the time for peace. I'm hoping that in Brussels, President Costa, the president of the European Council, go to Moscow, talk with President Putin. European security is an issue. Have direct discussions. Don't leave it to Trump. Don't leave it to the United States alone, but go for peace, but peace based on diplomacy between Europe and Russia as well.
I think one problem is, Jeffrey, I mean, I totally agree on your points. And I'm very, very delighted and would be more delighted if we do have more US Americans like you as really good friends of the Europeans. The thing is, how can we, I mean, as you said, my impression is the Americans, they don't care about peace in Europe. They just don't care because it's not their business. I mean, they're not interested in. So where are the allies in the United States for us, for Europeans, in aiming to get peace, in having good diplomatic relationships, to end the vassalage relationship to the Americans, between the Americans and the Europeans? Where are the allies for us? How can you help us?
First of all, Europe is a big place, 450 million people. Europe is a rich, wonderful place in the world. Europe is not about to be invaded by President Putin, no matter what stupid people might say. He's not going to. So the idea that Europe, without anyone from the US side, could go ahead and figure out how to have diplomacy, I'm fully confident, by the way. Of course, you have many friends and admirers in the United States, but Europe doesn't need the US to make diplomacy. Europe needs to regain its sense that it is a powerful, important, successful part of the world, I would say with the highest living standards in the entire world, with the best living conditions in the entire world. It should be very proud of what is accomplished here, and it should sit down with President Putin, and you should have a foreign minister that actually talks to Minister Lavrov, doesn't run away, doesn't say, we don't shake hands, we don't sit in the same room. How ridiculous.
She's the antithesis of diplomacy.
Like junior high school,
yeah,
rather than like grown-up diplomacy. Because Europe can absolutely do this. And so, I hope the U.S. supports it, but frankly, you don't need the U.S. support to do it. You need Europe to act together in Europe's interest.
Well, I didn't mean really the elites and the U.S. administration or the government, but I do think we do need more voices like yours from the United States.
We'll do the best we can.
Thanks a lot. We appreciate it a lot.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you both. It has been a pleasure. hearing you speaking with you. Also, vielen Dank zu alle unsere Zuschauer. Thank you guys very much for tuning in. It's been really a very fruitful discussion. Thank you both so much.
Great.
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate
Thanks
it.
a
I
lot.
admire so much your leadership.
No, don't exaggerate,
No, I'm
Jeffrey.
not exaggerating.
We are very, very happy to have you, and your voice is very important to us. And I wish we could invite you to the German Parliament to speak to our dumb government on all these colleagues there. So maybe we can. I mean, we are running now the campaign, and on the 23rd we have the elections, and I really do hope that we can organize such a thing.
Well, in the post-election season, let's wish for peace and work on it.
Yeah, really, I really would appreciate it. I mean, who are the allies in the new administration from your perspective?
Well,
I mean, Tulsi and
we're
RFK
waiting
are
to
just
see.
very silent.
Yeah, of course, people still need to be confirmed. We need to understand a lot. I've known Tulsi Gabbard for a long time. I admire her enormously.
Yeah, she's great. I know her.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I think she would will do a great job as head of national intelligence, and would really change the way things are done. But that means all the deep state forces are out now to try to stop that. Yeah. But she's strong, and I think she'll make it.
But the the State Department run by Marco Rubio, that is really concerning me.
Well, at least he has said in the last couple of days this war needs to end.
Ukraine.
And we need to go to diplomacy. And so I'm, not naive enough to take the words at face value, but I'm hopeful we're at the start, and maybe he'll be a diplomat. Okay. It's been a while.
Well,
we didn't have diplomacy for several years.
It's very wishful. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Jeffrey.
Thank you.
Thank you.